Okay, my friends, here it is. The Saturday morning live stream at the Garden Like a Viking headquarters, Zone 5/6, Northern Indiana. We got a special guest today. We got Gardener Scott. He is backstage right now, just hanging out, waiting to answer some of you guys' questions. We're going to get to know him. I know many of you follow him already, but in case you don't, then you get to understand who he is, what his channel's about. And yes, we did start way early today, which for Viking Standard Time, way early is 2 minutes late. So, okay, because we can't keep our guests waiting too long. And I had everything sorted out in advance. Okay, so I got the microphone, everything's charged. I mean, it's a sunny day, everything's wonderful. So I know a lot of people are going to be like, what, it started on time right now? I thought we were the customary 15 minutes late. No. Okay, so guys, let us know where you're at. What are you growing at the moment? What have you started? Hopefully not all that much. What are your hopes and dreams for the season? You know, that's what we want to know. What are your experiments happening? All that kind of stuff, because then we can review this back in the full time and see what was successful, what came to fruition. Yes? So, guys, if you're watching this after the fact, we are going to continue this part 2 of this discussion that you'll see. It's live, but part 2 of this will be on Scott's channel Monday morning at 11 o'clock Eastern time on his channel. We're going to do it live on his channel. So make sure that you bookmark that. The link is in the description, and you can go there, and we will carry on the conversation and see what comes of it. Also, we're going to talk about Scott's book. There's a link in the description to his book as well. So I guess without further ado, I just want to make sure everyone's here. Pop Herm, what's up, my friend? Dusty Flats, Big Will Dog is here. Brian Airy, yes. JP Exotic Pets, I don't think I've heard that one before. Dizzy Wiggles, I know I haven't heard that one before. Teats Treats, what's up, my friend? Andre Puskas from Serbia, what's up, my friend? Pam from South Africa. Jay Dixon, the reliable. Yes, good to see you here. Yeah, Teets, this isn't the new start time, okay? This is, well, it's only for now. We have a guest. So, guys, all right, let us get into it and make sure that you show Gardener Scott a very warm Viking welcome, okay? So let me figure out how to do this real quick. And, all right, are we here?
I'm here. Good morning, Nate. Hello to the tribe.
All right. What's up, my friend? Thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, it's great to be here. I love talking gardening on any day of the year. Most of the time, I just talk to myself. So when I have someone else to talk gardening with, it is a pleasure.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I feel you. So we will take the questions from the viewers here in a little bit, but first I just want to have you introduce yourself to my viewers. How long you been gardening? What is your kind of specialty, if you have one? What's your philosophy? You know, just sort of introduce yourself.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm Gardener Scott on YouTube and every place else. I've been gardening for about 35 years. Believe it or not, I did not grow up gardening. My parents didn't garden. My family didn't garden. So it came to me later in life. And I've been gardening seriously for about 25 years. About 20 years ago, I became a master gardener. And so that really changed my focus. And I don't have a particular specialty. I'm one of those gardeners who likes to do everything. So I'm always experimenting. It's a lot like you, Nate, where you hear something and you want to try it, and so you experiment with it. I do a lot of science-based education, so I like to have the facts behind the information in addition to just the anecdotal advice that you often see on YouTube. And so I've been on YouTube now for close to 15 years, and I've been focused on YouTube for about 8 or 9 years now. So hundreds of videos. I do the live stream every Monday, like you said, hundreds of live streams that I've done over the years. And I continue to learn and I continue to teach. And I think that's what gardening's all about.
Nice, nice. You said when you became a master gardener that sort of changed things for you. In what way?
And so I had a career in the U.S. Air Force as a pilot. I was an instructor pilot, a command pilot,
Whoa.
and so I've been an educator upside down at hundreds of knots per hour for many years. And when I retired, I was looking for what I was going to do in phase 2 or 3 of my life, and I discovered gardening and the Master Gardener program. And when I finished with the Master Gardener accreditation, they asked me to come back and start teaching classes. And so that's really what jump started this phase, was teaching for the Master Gardener program to the community, the public at large. And that kind of led me into making some videos. I became the chief gardener for a massive school gardening project. We started with nothing on 24,000 square feet of ground. It wasn't even soil. It was just compacted granite, and built 105 raised beds and dozens of fruit trees and just a massive garden space. And that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't have been the Master Gardener program that kind of kicked off this phase of my life.
Wow. So you had to orchestrate all of that with the raised
Oh, yeah.
beds and the succession sowing and what
Yep.
gets started when.
Yeah, it was really designed to be a food source for the school. It's a middle school, and a huge majority of the students are on free and reduced lunch, and really, it's a food desert in the middle of. I'm in Colorado Springs, and so the a few very choice and innovative leaders within the school district thought we could have a school garden that actually could grow food for the school. And so after a couple of years, we were growing more than 2,000 pounds that was being used in the lunchroom every day for the kids during the school year. And so, yeah, it was massive. We started with nothing, and we had no budget either. So I also had to learn about grants and money making opportunities and donations. And so all of those beds, the lumber was donated. I coordinated with a local high school to actually have their wood shop, build the beds and then deliver the beds and then fill the beds. And then the students were the ones that were sowing the seeds and taking care of the plants and doing the harvest during class time. And which really meant I gave them like 15 minutes a day to actually do anything in the garden. So the bulk of the work came down to me and an army of volunteers.
Wow, that's an incredible project. Uh,
Yeah, thanks. It was.
so I have two questions about that. One, what was the main things that were the crops that were being fed to the kids? What were the main things?
And so here in Colorado, we're a bit limited in what we can grow. And so I had to match the seasons with the school year. And so, you know, during the spring, we were eating root vegetables and salad crops, those kind of things that we could start in February or March and be able to harvest and serve in the cafeteria before school got out in May. And then over the summer, I and the volunteers would grow the peppers and the tomatoes and the squash and all the summer crops. So when the kids came back in August, they could start harvesting and use all of those same crops in the garden during the fall. And then we had a 42-foot dome greenhouse, and so we were able to continue the growing typically to about December. And December, January, February, we weren't feeding ourselves much from the garden, but all the other months of the school year, stuff
Wow,
that
potatoes.
not a lot of potatoes.
Oh,
I did it the one year, and the kids weren't as interested. But it's surprising because a lot of the foods that, if you're trying to get your kids to eat foods they never eat, if they grow those same foods themselves, they
Mm,
love it. And so
mm.
Swiss chard was a favorite. All the root crops were favorites. And so it's really incredible when you get kids involved with gardening that you can improve their diet because they're the ones that are doing the seed sowing and the taking care of the plants and then harvesting, and they just want to eat what they've grown.
Wow. And so, do you, for the viewers watching that have kids, which is many of them, of course, how receptive were the kids to working in the garden, and what would be some tips for some to help get your kids involved and get them wanting to do that?
Yeah, so definitely involve them with the planning. And so, like for instance, a few years ago, I got my granddaughters involved with a purple garden. So we planned purple carrots, purple potatoes, purple kohlrabi, purple beans, just a whole bunch of purple plants. And they were involved with the planning of it. And then I let them actually select the seed packets and sow the seeds. And then they're not here every day, so I took care of it, but they were definitely involved with the harvest and eating all the purple plants they ate. And so at the school, it was kind of the same thing, though we didn't have colored gardens like that. They were able to pick the seed packets, and so I would get hundreds of packages donated, and I would say, okay, today we're going to do tomatoes, and I would let the kids choose which tomato packs of the hundreds that we were going to start that day. And I did that with everything. And so by the time the plants go in the garden, the kids know which plants are theirs. And so when it comes time to transplant, they want to transplant the tomato or whatever it was that they had started indoors, or the carrot package that they had selected. And then it's easy by that point because it's theirs. It's like a pet. It's their plant that they want to take care of. And then at harvest time, they're the first ones to harvest from that plant and the first ones to eat from that plant. So it just becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy if you allow them to decide what that prophecy is going to be.
Nice, nice. So I'm hearing get them vested in the process is what it sounds like. Very nice.
Absolutely. From the beginning. Before I became a master gardener, before I was so dedicated to gardening, I had a garden. And when my kids were preteens in particular, I didn't know or quite understand that whole concept yet. And so my kids weren't involved with my gardening because for them it was a chore. It
Yes.
was it was okay, let's go out to the garden and pull weeds, or let's
Like,
go out to the garden and harvest, or let's go pick up the rocks or water. And it was after the fact I tried to get them involved and they had no interest whatsoever. But now that they're older, like my son is doing that with his 4-year-old. His 4-year-old is involved with every aspect of his homestead and is a great help because he's involved and very interested in it as well.
very nice. Shield Ama wants to know if the school had a canning program or how do you preserve things like that with the kids?
So they didn't, but after I became a master gardener, I actually became a master food preserver as well. So that gave me a network that enabled me to work with the local university. And so while I didn't do it, I was able to bring in teams from the university to talk about preservation and then actually have little seminars. It was more than just Gardner Scott teaching everything. I actually tried to get other organizations involved with the kids as well. And so Flying Carrot is the local organization at the school, the university. And so they would bring in teams and we would talk about preserving and really a great aspect of it as well. The kids would go out and harvest. These teams of young adults would arrive and we would fix meals. So they would teach how to cook in addition to how to
Wow,
preserve the
what a
harvest.
great program. I mean,
Yeah.
that is the whole circle right there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a huge believer in preserving your harvest.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's half the battle. I mean, that's what we're doing it for. Absolutely. Okay. So we are just going to kind of go through some questions.
Sure.
They might not relate to each other. They're just questions people are asking. So we've got Serena Norell says,
Hi,
Gardner
Serena.
Scott, it's supposed to warm up to 50 degrees Fahrenheit today, 70 by Monday, and then get cooler towards the end of the month and into March. When can I transplant cold weather crops like cabbage?
And so the nice thing about cabbage and brassicas and those type of plants that we're typically growing in spring is that they're cold hardy and you can get them in early. However, I don't look at the air temperature, I look at the soil temperature. And so for best results, you could have a 70-degree day. And if the soil temperature is 35 degrees, the plants aren't going to do that well. They'll survive because they can handle cold, but they'll probably be shocked. You might have some you will have some root damage. You might have some cellular damage when the nights fall back down to cold. And so I like to look for 50 degrees as just a minimum soil temperature when I start doing my transplanting of those cool season plants. I want 60 or 70 degrees when I start looking at the summer plants that I'm going to be putting in. So Serena's heard me say this before on my channel. Measure your soil temperature, and that's really a better indicator of when to start putting plants in the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a perfect answer. And I also recommend to people that in the because we're all about mulch here, always mulching everything. Make sure you got a layer of mulch for the moisture, organic matter, block the ultraviolet radiation. But in the springtime, that can keep the soil cool for a long time. And so I typically recommend you can remove the mulch and let that heat up. I typically put landscaping fabric down for a few weeks. So
Yeah.
it can breathe, and then that blackness will absorb the heat.
Yeah, great suggestion. I do the same thing. All of my beds are covered with mulch right now. It's still a little early for me here in Colorado, but this week we're getting up into the 60s for the first time in like 5 months. And I'll leave the mulch on a little bit more because it's still too early for me.
Yeah,
But next month, yeah, March, I'll pull my mulch back. I'll put a similar type of cover to heat up, and I can actually expect 50-degree temperatures in the beginning of April here in the mountains of Colorado by doing
nice.
all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Nice. Look to Nature Homestead says, question, Mr. Scott, from your experience, what is the biggest mistake gardeners make starting their gardens in the spring?
Yeah, so this may sound like an odd answer, but I think it actually correlates to how you like to do things as well, Nate. I think the biggest mistake about starting your garden in spring is starting your garden in spring.
I'm,
You should be starting your garden in fall. You need to think about the planning. You need to think about the soil preparation. You need to think about all of those things that really lead to a successful spring garden long before spring shows up. And so getting your plan in place and then getting the seeds, amending the soil, that's what needs to happen. So the biggest mistake is just waiting too long and then starting your spring garden and starting all of your seed selection. All of us are guilty of this. If you've gardened for any amount of time, you're going to say, oh, this year I want to try whatever. And then if you wait too long, you go to find those seeds, you go to get those plants, and it's too late. It's already sold out. So it's the planning in advance that I think really can overcome what I think is one of the biggest problems.
yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I would say as well, is the starting it in the spring. Because especially for like people that are like, hey, it's springtime, I want to start my garden. How do I get rid of the grass? Like, man, you could have put a tarp down over that all
Yeah,
winter long and you would have bare earth by now.
exactly.
But if you do have it in the spring, then I would say that the top mistake would be what we talked about just a moment ago, and going off of air temperature and not soil temperature, because air temperature doesn't matter all that much. It's
Yeah.
the soil temperature, of course.
Yeah, some of those plants, like if you start seeds indoors, even the warm plants, the peppers and the eggplants that like to have, a 75 or 80-degree heat mat to start the germination. Once those plants are growing, they'll do fine at 50 or 60 degree air temperature. It
Mhm.
really is about the germination of the seeds.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely, it is. It's about that soil temperature. Um, Lee Hampton, yes, I could do that. Email me, okay? Let's see here. Big Will Dog, who is a fellow veteran, says, "Have you ever been able to do any programs with the VA or any other veteran groups?"
Yeah, actually, so one of the things that I was able to do, and yeah, my school garden was a little unique because I was a master gardener and I was an educator, and so I had a number of groups that would come in during the week, in particular, occasionally on the weekends, for group tours. And I did that with VA groups, and one of the things I did with the VFW for as well. And so I did a few times. I was invited back or invited to a different venue for some lessons, and so I would teach classes to different groups along those lines. So. Uh, of course, being part of the school district at a school, the focus was on the students, but I did encourage church groups and veterans groups and anybody else that wanted to come to the garden to see what we were doing and learn about growing your own food in particular.
Mm, mm, very nice. Back. Not a question. Just wanted to share some love. Says Gardner Scott. I watch a lot of your videos. Just wanted to say how talented of a teacher you are
Thank
and
you.
grateful for what you share and how you share it. Victory Gardens on the radar too.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, my most recent video was about doing victory gardens. And so thanks, Beck. I appreciate that.
Okay. Let us see here. So we had a post on. I put a post on YouTube and said that we were going to be doing this, and so some people had some questions that they had. All right,
Okay.
so the Mo Shun says, "Do you use a foliar feed or spray? If so, what's your recipe and application methods? If not, how come? Pest, disease, results don't warrant the extra effort, or what?
Uh,
Thanks. I'll be tuning in."
okay. Yes. Yes. No, no. Yes.
Right.
Yes. So as part of my typical gardening practices, I do not do foliar feeding, but that's because I am focused on the soil. And so with an amended soil, uh, a healthy soil, and it takes a few years to reach that point. And so that I'll come back to this point. So my soil is about 5 years old now, very healthy, nice and rich. My plants, it is a picture of my garden last year behind me. I didn't have any insect pests. I have no disease problems. So I don't have a need for foliar feeding or foliar pest management because my soil takes care of all of that. And so the soil has all the nutrients. I get an occasional soil test just to confirm that it's not becoming deficient in anything. The one thing that I do occasionally, and there are some studies that back this up, is to use a diluted milk solution when powdery mildew starts setting in. So just to kind of delay the onset of some of those type of diseases. I don't care about it for the most part. Everybody gets powdery mildew. It's all around us all the time. We're breathing in the spores. We can't prevent it. And if I have a crop of squash and it's starting to be affected, then I might do a foliar spray for something along those lines. I've read some of the studies about using a compost tea as a foliar spray, but I haven't had any of the indications that I would need to do that because my soil is good and my plants are strong. If I see that there's a deficiency, and if I noticed in particular that one area of my garden is suffering, because I listen to my plants. I mean, they talk to us, and so they're going to tell us what's going on. If I hear them or see them communicating with me, I might do it, but I haven't had a need to. And that's one of the advantages to raised bed gardening is that you can see all these little pockets of plants and know what you've done with that soil. And then you can use that to help regulate whether you need to do some of those things.
Yeah, perfect answer. And so, what are some of them things you're doing to the soil that make it so good that you don't need the other stuff?
And so I talk to it. I treat it as a living organism. I treat it as a friend of mine in the garden. And so when I have friends come over and we socialize, I always have hors d'oeuvres. We often have dinner. I'll fix dessert. And then there's that nice conversation that happens over the course of the evening. And so that's kind of how I treat my soil as well, is is different phases of amending to include like compost. A fully decomposed compost is loaded with nutrients. So that's kind of the appetizer, and I do that on a regular basis. But I use rough materials as well. So I'll use crushed leaves and dried grass and manures and worm castings and leaf mold. Those are typically applied in fall, like we were referencing earlier, because I'll put those rougher materials in the ground in fall, and it'll be 6, sometimes 7 months before I'm putting anything into that bed. So that's all of that time for the soil organisms to just enjoy that meal, because it's everything they need. And I like to look at it. I mentioned this, I think, on a live stream recently. For me, it's all about the combination pizza versus the cheese pizza. If you're just doing one thing, that's not enough. And so a cheese pizza, yeah, it's tasty, but it's not giving you everything that you want on a pizza. My soil is a combination pizza. It's got the pepperoni and the mushrooms, and it's got the olives, and it's got the green peppers, and it's got the red pepper, and it's got the sausage. I mean, that's what my soil is. My soil is made up of the crushed leaves, which give minerals and different nutrients than the compost will. And then by having the grass and the manures and those type of ingredients, it encourages different soil life into the bed as well. And then for dessert, after the soil has everything it needs, it's mulch. It's cover all of that with a good organic mulch, either a rough compost or a straw or more grass, whatever it happens to be. And when you treat all of that as a circle that's going to benefit the soil, uh, I think it's relatively easy because it's just a regular part of my calendar, and I don't have to worry about it. My soil loves me, and I love my soil.
Man, very nice. Wow. Our philosophies are so similar in many
Yeah,
ways there. And I really like that you speak in analogies like that. I mean, that's very good for understanding, for people to
thanks.
understand. And that's a good one too. I'm actually probably going to use that, but I'll
Steal
reference
it.
you.
Go for it.
That's a very good one. So are there are there things that you would not serve to your soil?
Yeah, I don't serve synthetic chemicals of any type, and because my soil is so good, I haven't used fertilizers of any type, even organic fertilizers, for years. The only
Meaning what? For, like when you say fertilizers.
And so, like the fish emulsions, kelp, those kind of things, organic slow release fertilizers like bat guano, blood
Hmm.
meal, bone meal, those type of things. I'll use those when I'm initially filling a bed to kind of jumpstart some of the nutrients in the bed. But after the 4 or 5 year point, I just go purely with the plant-based materials in my bed for the most part. To include manures, I consider manures a plant-based material because they're plants that the animal have eaten.
Hmm.
And so, of course, no petrochemicals of any type. But then once the bed's established, I really am cutting back and no longer using the blood meal and the bone meal and the fish and all those other kind of things.
Hmm. Yeah. Yep. Definitely makes a lot of sense. Very good. Teats Treats, $2. Thank you for the tip, my friend. He says, does Scott use a grow light in his greenhouse?
As I'm nodding my head, yes, the answer is no. Uh, and so I'm acknowledging the question because I get a lot of these kind of questions. I have an unheated greenhouse, And so even the greenhouse at the school was unheated. The school greenhouse was about 300 feet away from a power source, and my greenhouse is about 100 feet away from a power source. And so everything I do in my greenhouse is non-electrical. Now, this season, this is only the third year that I have my home greenhouse. I've been experimenting with different methods using candles, kerosene, propane as a supplementary heat source and doing a lot of documentation. I know you love your documentation too. So I've been keeping track of low temperatures and then these different heat sources so that I can figure out how I can maintain a temperature in the greenhouse when I want to garden in the winter, because currently I'm not gardening during the winter in my greenhouse. But to this question specifically, this year, I plan to move forward with solar panels that will give me some electricity, because I think I've got the heat kind of figured out. And the next phase is light, because there's just not enough light in our latitude to grow anything in a greenhouse during the winter. But by adding grow lights at this time of year, along with some of that heat, next year, I'm planning to do that.
Very nice. Okay, two questions. One, what is that heat? What is the heat source that you think that you've got figured out?
So I did a video on this a couple of years ago when I first started it. Water is a primary heat battery in my greenhouse. And so my greenhouse is roughly 130 square feet. And I can hear me talking to you, Nate. So a little bit of feedback there.
Not sure what's going on with that.
I don't know if it's coming out the speaker. It might be on my end. But anyway, so in my greenhouse, I have about 250 gallons of water. And that makes a huge difference with moderating the temperature. And, you know, here in my zone 5B, Colorado Garden, the temperature has gotten down to minus 15 in the last 2 winters. Just having the water in the greenhouse with no other supplemental heat, the coldest my greenhouse got was 15 degrees. So a 30-degree difference just by having the water in the greenhouse. And this year, by having those supplemental heating sources, I'm able to keep it at about 28 degrees as a minimum on those nights when the temperature has dropped down that low. So we got down to minus 10 a few weeks ago. And with propane heat, it was 28 degrees in my greenhouse.
Wow. Wow. So, okay, heat sink basically is the term for that, right?
Yeah.
And what barrels? Barrels or totes?
Yeah. So I have some 55-gallon barrels. You know, that's enough to give me 165 gallons. And then I have some 27-gallon totes that are stacked on top of each other. And then I have gallon jugs everywhere, and, you know, to fill all the nooks and crannies. And then, of course, everything is painted black, which really does make a difference. The first year I went with the natural color of the barrels, and they were blue. And by painting them black, I gained about 3 to 5 degrees.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Okay. So then, before we move on from the greenhouse topic, then, unless we get more questions about it, what are some of the what are some of the common misconceptions that you see with people when they first start using a greenhouse?
So I'll speak to here in Colorado, and I think it's similar to a lot of other areas. You think a greenhouse will make your gardening life easier, and it just adds more complication, particularly if it's an unheated greenhouse. You really have to figure out what you're going to do to create the heat sink, the heat batteries, to think about the thermal dynamics that are in play. But the thing that I think really throws most people off is the heat that builds up and builds up and builds up, and it has to be released. And so ventilation is critical in a greenhouse. And people just don't have a clue about that until they get a greenhouse and fry all their plants because it gets too hot inside the greenhouse. And then the other aspect of it is because it's so much work, they end up not doing it. So most of the gardeners I know around me that have greenhouses use the greenhouse as a shed because it ended up being too much work to actually grow plants during the summer when it was so hot, or to grow plants in the winter when it was so cold.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I would say two of those things, because I did a lot of greenhouse growing back in the day in Northern California. And two of the things is that one, the people think that, oh, I'm going to get a greenhouse, so now I can grow year round. But what you don't want to actually try and create a fourth season or try to create a whole new season, because most people don't understand that the nighttime temperature is going to be ambient unless you have some kind of heat source, or unless you've got some kind of thing in place for that. So you're starting your tomatoes and stuff like that. Just because it's 100 degrees in there in the daytime, when the sun goes away, it drops to ambient. Yeah.
Or actually below. I did a video when I first started that first winter, and I was tracking all the temperatures. And it was exactly that. Before I put the water in, before I had the concrete pavers and the gravel, and my nighttime temperatures were as cold as the ambient air, but in the morning, it was actually cold inside the greenhouse and outside the greenhouse because it became a refrigerator. It just got cold and held in the cold. And so that you're right. That's a huge point that I think people don't realize, that just because it's a greenhouse does not mean it's going to be hot when it's cold outside.
Right, definitely, yeah. And those heat sinks can also become cold sinks. They can keep it colder longer in the daytime, like you were saying.
Yep.
So, okay, Taylor Reindl says, does Scott use drip lines with raised beds since he's so hot and dry in Colorado?
So I don't. I have, but one of my basic philosophies, and I've kind of touched on this already, is I talk to my plants and my plants talk to me. So I like getting up close and personal with my plants on a daily basis. I can see any problems before they become problems. I can see any pests before they become pests. And I do that by hand watering. So even though I've got a very large garden space, as you can see behind me, I like hand watering, and I like getting out there. And because it's so hot and dry in Colorado, and because my beds are different, and because I use different mulches, my beds are not the same from one side of my garden to the next. So if I were to put a drip irrigation or any type of automatic watering in place, some of my beds would get too much, some of my beds would get too little in my effort to try to be the same throughout the garden. And so there are times when I'm hand watering and I recognize, oh, this bed doesn't need water today. Or this bed needs twice as much water as I would normally give it. And so with a drip automatic system, I just think you can run into some problems because you're not necessarily catering to your plant's needs. You're catering to your own needs. And there's nothing wrong with that. People work, people have lives. A drip system makes it easy. And that's when I've used drip in the past, is because I had a job and I had those things I had to do. But now that I can get out there, I just do it myself.
Nice. So in the summertime, where you're at, it's pretty dry then. It goes a while without rain like that? You can't rely on the rain?
Oh, no. We'll get down to single-digit humidity, and we'll have the thunderstorms that roll through on a pretty regular basis in May and June, occasionally July. But last year, I think July, we did not have a drop of rain. And I think it was 3 weeks of August before we saw a drop of rain. So it's not unusual to go 6 or 8 weeks without any rain, even when the thunderstorms are rolling through every day.
Wow. Yeah. Same here. Last year, we went 10 solid weeks without any drop of rain, just full sun, not even cloud cover. It's unbelievable. Yeah. We used to be an area where you could just, you rely on the water, I mean, that's why things are grown here in the Midwest, is because the farmers don't have to irrigate.
Water. Okay.
Right. They just let it go, but man, but they've got those monstrosity varieties of corn and soybeans now that don't need water. They just don't need anything. They grow no matter what.
That's right.
Yeah. So thank you for the $5, Taylor Rindle. We got to that question anyways. So you mentioned that none of your raised beds are the same. And what do you mean by that?
And so one of the things that I encourage gardeners to do every day, and I do it myself, is to start small. And so this house that I live in now, I've been here for about 5.5 years. And though I have a huge garden now, in the beginning I had nothing. And so I started with 2 beds, and then I added 2 more beds. And then in the next year I added a couple of beds. And the way I approach filling my beds is to use as much of what I have on hand as possible. And so if I was building and filling a raised bed in fall, I would use soil and a lot of leaves, for instance, because leaves and grass are prevalent in the fall. If I was filling one of those new beds in the spring, I might be using manure and some of the leaves that I had saved. And so my soil composition is different from bed to bed, just based on where I was filling it and what ingredients I had on hand when I was filling it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so when you say that you add things like leaves, to what degree are you talking about? Just like leaves, or is it leaf mold? Are they composted? Are you mixing leaves into the actual root zone, or what?
Yes, to all the above.
Ooh.
And so the primary bed I use for my vegetable garden in particular is a bed that's about 16 inches high, sometimes a little bit higher. And in the base of that bed, I'm putting branches and wood chips and a lot of leaves and pine needles and manures. That's in the bottom part. The top part is the soil. I use more of the native soil that incorporates the organic matter that we've been talking about. And I have made leaf mold. I'm currently making leaf mold. As you know, it's a lengthy process. And so some of that goes into the soil. But I really like, and I learned this from Dr. Elaine Ingham, who is all about the soil food web. Fungal activity in your soil can be as important as the bacterial activity within your soil. And so we look at the compost as being a primary ingredient, and our soil becomes bacterial rich. We can't lose sight of the fungi that need to be growing in the bed. And that's where the leaves come in. So by crushing up the leaves, we're encouraging that fungal growth. And the fungal hyphae and the rhizosphere and everything that's happening at the root level, having some of those wood materials like crushed leaves really can make a big difference in the overall health of the soil.
Absolutely. No, very good. I hear you guys saying that we have some echoes and stuff. I went to settings and did echo cancellation, so I hope it's fixed.
Yeah, and I've got headphones on, so there's nothing that's coming out of my speaker.
Okay, so it's actually probably me, because this is only my second guest live stream, and it's usually
and I can hear myself after I talk, and it sounds like it's coming from you. So
so that's amateur move on my part.
That's okay.
But I don't have any because my microphone taps it, so I'll have to get some Bluetooth speakers or some Bluetooth headphones.
Yeah.
So hope that it
or you can turn down the volume enough, and it might be kind of hard to hear for you. Yeah, see, that's less. That's not as loud as it was.
There we go. I had it cranked up all the way.
Okay.
Okay. There you go. Nice. Thank you. Yeah, when I do this next time, I will get a headset. Okay.
We're here to help, Nate.
Right. So let's. I want to get to a. Let's see. Okay. Chris Black says tips and secrets to raised garden beds that people may not consider important.
Buy my book.
Perfect segue into the book, huh?
Yeah. So there's a ton of them. I do have a book. It's coming out on March 1st, Gardener Scott's Guide to Raised Bed Gardening. And it's packed with tips. So Uh, I'll
There's
I'll
a
talk
link in
about.
the description, guys. So to his book, there's a link in the description to that.
Great, thanks. And so I I love my raised beds. I encourage raised beds for most gardeners. They're not ideal for everybody, and they're not ideal for every plant. And I talk about that in the book. But it really is like I just talked about. Start small, start with just a couple raised beds and figure out, is it something you like doing? Learn from it, learn about the soil, learn about planning, because then one of the nice things about raised beds is the planning aspect of it. When you grow in a rectangular bed or a square bed, it's a grid, it's a mathematical grid, and you can figure out well before you put a single seed in the ground exactly where that seed is going to go in the bed. And so I do a lot of that where you pre-plan the whole bed. You go out to the garden and just go plop, 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 stick your finger in, make some holes, pop the seeds in, and now you have perfectly spaced seeds in your garden bed. So taking advantage of that planning aspect, I think, is one of the biggest tips, because in-ground gardening is great. We've been doing it for millennia, but it's one of those things that it's not as easy to be precise with the amount of plants that you're growing. And so, like, a portion of my bed talks about intensive gardening and how you can actually modify through staggered rows the maximum amount of plants that you can grow in a bed. And raised beds are ideal for that. And then, of course, you can design your own soil. I've already talked about that. All my soils are different because I just create them differently. But I also talk about in the book Mel Bartholomew's method for raised beds, his Mel's Mix soil, which is very simple, very easy to make. And you could do that in all of your beds and know that every bed is exactly the same. I talk about Joe Lample's perfect soil recipe that he uses, a little more like how I do it, with using the organic materials in different ratios. But that's all part of the raised bed gardening. When it comes to the tips, is focus on the soil, focus on the planning, and then the rest kind of just happens. Watering a raised bed is no different than watering an in-ground bed or a container, as far as what you're giving your plants. And the same with the harvesting and the trellising and all those other things that are important. That just comes, but it's the prep work. And I talk about this in the book as well, because I want everyone to understand that when you garden in raised beds, it doesn't have to be a wooden box. It doesn't have to be what all of us on YouTube are doing for the most part. It can be different. I've got metal raised beds. I've got stone raised beds. I've got raised beds that are surrounded by logs as a log wall with the soil in between. And I've got hugelculture beds that are raised mounds that don't have any sides at all. And so don't feel like you need to be limited in the type of raised bed you have just because the rest of us are using something that appears to be similar. I like the idea of gardeners changing an idea like raised beds and modifying it so it fits within their garden with what they like to look at and what they like to add to a garden space.
Very good. I like that response, and it's completely in line with my experience as well. So I see a lot of you guys were talking about the echo. Thank you so much for the help for trying to get it figured out. So I'm just going to mute my thing when I'm not talking, and I think that solves it. So
Yeah.
sorry about that, but we won't let that happen again. So okay, so we're just gonna kind of jump around, to
Sure.
more questions like I do in my own live stream. I just see what I can get and pick the questions out. But I want your opinion on, have you ever heard of electroculture?
So I want to save this for my show, okay? Um, because I've watched your electroculture videos, and I really, really love your video where you are out in your garden and you're talking about the results of your test. And so, I'm sorry to take it away from your audience here today, but that's on my list of things to talk with you about on Monday, because I love what you've done with Electroculture. So yes, I've heard of it, and I had a plan to actually do much like what you did, Nate, trying the different antennae and doing a test of the different methods within my garden. I haven't done it yet, and I love what you've done. So I look forward to talking more about that.
Nice, nice. Yeah. So, guys, remember, we will talk part two on his channel at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday, where we will talk about the electroculture. I know everybody
Among
wants to
other
know
things.
about it. So, maybe you'll get your mind blown. We don't know. Um, so, let's see here, kind of jumping around in the comments here. Now, okay, Z says, what do you think about trench composting? And is it good for fixing high clay soil? Also, side note, have any tips on bokashi composting?
And so, trench composting, if done the way I think it should be intended to be done, can have benefits, and it can be good to fix clay soil and sandy soil as well. I think where the problem comes in is gardeners who don't fully understand the concept. So a trench, you dig a trench in your bed, and then you bury your banana peels and your eggshells and your spinach trimmings and whatever else you have in your kitchen, and you bury it into a trench and then cover it with soil. And over time, that will decompose, and the earthworms are going to come in and they're going to love it. And you're going to have bacteria and fungi that also move in. And that is great if you're using it purely as a way to fix your soil. I think where it becomes a problem, and I get questions on this occasionally from people saying it doesn't work. All my plants died, or my plants did terribly. It's because they dug the trench, they buried all of their kitchen scraps in it, covered it with an inch of soil, and then sowed their seeds in that inch of soil. And so plants are not going to grow in decomposing banana peels and spinach waste and whatever else you have. First off, it takes a lot of nitrogen to break down those materials. So you're depleting nitrogen that might be in the surrounding soil temporarily as part of that decomposition. But that also means there's no nitrogen available for the plants to begin growing. And so the reason that trench composting often doesn't work is because people are growing in the trench and the plants are deficient in nitrogen and carbon, a lot of those other critical macronutrients, because the soil organisms are using all of those nutrients. Over time, it stabilizes, and all of that organic material releases the nutrients into the soil. And so, if you do trench composting, I would suggest you do it like on the edges of the bed while you grow in the middle of the bed, or the opposite. You'll see a lot of people that advocate the tube. You bury the PVC tube in the middle of the bed, and you fill the tube with all your kitchen scraps, and then you plant around it. Same kind of thing. That can have benefits as those nutrients are released into the soil. So just kind of avoid planting in the trench, and it can be a way to improve clay soil or whatever type of soil you happen to have. I think bokashi is a great option for people who want to compost during the winter if they don't have a lot of material to compost. My garden began this way, where I didn't have a lot of raw material to actually create a compost pile. But you can have a bokashi in a bucket underneath your sink, and it can actually be a great way to get started with composting, and an alternative to the big bins that a lot of people think we all have. We don't all have. Sometimes it is just buckets of bokashi.
Very good. Okay. Man, lots of good knowledge here. Lots of good experience. JP Exotic Pets, thank you very much for the $20 donation, my friend. Says,
Nice.
thank you guys for the info, watching all your old videos over too. This will be my second year, but really just my first year with seedlings. Last year was just planting perennials and some herbs. All right, well, best of luck, my friend. And with
Yeah.
the knowledge on this channel, Scott's channel, you're well armed with the knowledge that you need. Now, another one. Let's see. So we got a question from AK Froggy. We got a question from Jerry Bates. First, we're going to go from AK Froggy. Says, my biggest problem is rabbits. Nothing seems to stop them, and they eat the young shoots. Do you have a preferred method for dealing with them?
I do. And it might actually surprise you. It's pretty simplistic. It's raised beds. I have rabbits, and I've had rabbits since I moved in. I have rabbits that live underneath my garden shed, which is right next to my garden, and my rabbits do not eat anything that are in my beds. So most animals are going to take the easy approach when it comes to feeding. And so my raised beds in my vegetable garden have wood chip mulch between the beds. And I do the best I can to keep the weeds down between my beds. But around that area, I let the weeds grow. I let all of my native plants grow. And those native plants are the food for my native rabbits. And so by essentially segregating my garden because of these wood chip pathways, they have to crawl across wood, which they don't eat, and there's nothing in the wood for them to eat. Then they have to jump up 16 to 18 inches to get into my bed to discover what might be in my bed. And I have dogs, I have hawks, I have owls, I have a lot of predators in the area. So the rabbit is going to not expose itself on my wood chip mulch paths or in the middle of my open garden bed. It's going to stay to the edges of the fence, it's going to stay to the edges of the shed, and it's going to feed basically all around the garden because it's more protected for the rabbit. And it works for me. I haven't had a plant lost to rabbits ever. My last house had rabbits as well. Never lost a plant to a rabbit because I gave them other alternatives. I did not clear out their natural food source.
Very nice. I like that a lot. Actually, that's pretty much the best answer on rabbit control that I've heard. It's strategy over substance. You know, a lot of times people are like, "What can I spray on the plants?" Or can I sprinkle cinnamon or put forks around in the plants? You know, put forks. I'm sure you've heard that one.
Mhm.
And so all that stuff. But I like that the most, and that's
Thanks.
exactly what I would say. Strategize the planting and see, you know, they're not going to expose themselves like that. So yeah, exactly. If you've got the space to let some of it go wild and be a little bit food for them, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Think about Peter Rabbit in Mr. McGregor's garden. You know, he had this beautiful garden that he wanted to get into. It was fenced, so he crawled through the fence, lost his pants, depending on which story you're reading. But everything around Mr. McGregor's garden was barren. And so Peter Rabbit and Flopsy and Mopsy and Cottontail, they all wanted to get in. I give them no reason to want to get in.
Very good. And you don't find that that the native plants have the defenses that they want to go for your tender? Well, obviously you don't. But has your experience ever been such that they want to go for your tender crops over what you let go fallow or wild?
No, because like any pest, they're going to be focused on very specific plants. And so the rabbits in my area were here long before I moved in, long before I put my garden in place. So there are native grasses and native flowers and dandelions and all types of plants that are growing in my landscape. And the the rabbits are eating those plants that are naturally growing, and they know what tastes good. And so that's why I don't eliminate anything that's growing in my landscape, because I let the rabbits do it. And the rabbits with my dogs, the rabbits have actually moved to the front yard. I occasionally see them in the back if the dogs are in the house, and they still live underneath my shed. They just have to wait until the dogs are in the house before they come out. But they're more free to roam in my front yard. And so the dogs go nuts looking out the window and seeing the rabbits hopping in my front yard. And I can observe what they're eating. And so I think that's an important aspect as well. If you can actually observe your rabbits and see what they're eating, make sure you keep that in your landscape.
Very good advice. Yeah, very good advice. Big West says, do you or did you vermiculture worms?
Absolutely. In fact, I have a short series of vermiculture on my channel where I talk about how and show how to start a bin and then how to feed the worms and then how to harvest the castings. So yeah, absolutely. I think vermicomposting is, again, an easy, I actually do vermicomposting over bokashi because I use the ingredients that I would use in bokashi to feed my worms, and that makes it easy. So it doesn't have to be an either or. It's just I don't produce that much kitchen waste to support two systems like that, and so I tend to actually focus on the vermiculture, and then I use the castings. And so some of my videos where I talk about I make all my own seed starter mixes and all my own potting mixes, and I talk about the worm castings as well because a lot of channels talk about adding worm castings to a mix. If you're going to make your own mix, what could be better than to use your own worm castings when you're making your own mixes? And so I don't make so much that I add a lot to the garden, but I make enough that I can add it to my potting mixes.
Very good. Very good. So the Argle Bargle says, what is your most hated weed and how do you deal with it?
So um, I try not to hate weeds because and of course, I got a video about. I got videos on everything. I got a video that says weeds are good for the garden. There is some insect, probably a predator, a wasp, that's being attracted by that weed. There might be a pollinator that's being attracted by that weed, or like we were just talking about with the rabbits are eating the weeds. I have deer problems as well, and so some of the weeds that I think are a problem, the deer eat. So I try not to hate weeds, but the ones that I dislike the most, and I've actually mentioned this, I think I only mentioned it once, and I got a lot of feedback for this. But purslane is my nemesis because I was not, at least in that phase of my life, eating a weed. I had yet to learn about purslane. I now know about the history of purslane, the nutrient benefits of purslane. But for a number of years, purslane was my nemesis because it was in all my beds, it was in all my pathways. This was at my last garden. And so I just was constantly fighting the purslane. I've modified my philosophy now. And if I see purslane occasionally, I'll munch on it. I still pull it out of my beds, and I definitely pull it before it sets seed, but it's not the nemesis that it used to be. And then, from there, I've got a minor problem with Russian thistle in this area, but I stay on top of it. If I see some of those weeds early in the season, I'm pulling them or cutting them before they become a bigger problem. So that's why I really don't have a hated weed, because I take care of the ones that I don't like before they get to that status.
Mm. And what about specifically quackgrass? Do you have to deal with that, or because the rhizome growing grasses are unbelievable?
Yeah, I don't have a big problem with the quack grass. I kind of let it go because the rabbits, at least in my area, the rabbits eat the quack grass. And so I kind of let it go to a point where if I start seeing like 5 or 6 popping up, you know how it spreads out and it becomes an ever widening ring. If I see that it's kind of started that second ring, then I'll get in and I'll do some serious digging and pulling. I don't mind an occasional plant here or there, but that's all part of that prevention, is just acting on it before it becomes a big problem.
Hmm. Okay, very good. Serena Norell has a question. Then we'll get to Jerry Bates's question. says, does soil temperature differ between the greenstock, the raised beds, and the ground? If so, by how much?
Yeah, so surprisingly, I have a video about this. So I actually, I've so much about the science and the documenting, and so I measured the soil temperature over a course of a year a while back, and there really is no discernible difference between the ground temperature and the raised bed temperature. They will thaw at different rates and they will freeze at different rates. So, for instance, a raised bed will thaw sooner and it will freeze sooner than the in ground bed, but the temperature of the soil is going to be pretty much the same. And I've seen this for years now. There might be a 1 or 2 degree difference, but I think more of that is how thick the mulch is and whether it's actually receiving the amount of direct sun uh, in the different areas that you're measuring. But there is a difference in containers. So with a green stock or with a pot or with a 5 gallon bucket, you're going to see those variations much quicker. And so while the ground and the raised beds will begin to cool overnight after the sun goes down, it's gradual, and about the time the temperature starts to fall, the sun's coming up, and then it moderates again. But not so in those containers. So they get cold faster and they get hot faster because they don't have that mass that helps to moderate the temperature.
Yeah, very true. And I would like to add to that that a lot of people will they're focused on the air temperature again. So they'll look at the forecast and say, "Well, it's going to be in the 70s." Great, but if you after you have enough experience with raised beds and greenhouses and in the sun and all different kinds of places in the shade, you realize that everything comes down to the sun. That it's so. And I see this a lot of times with people, especially in the South, and they say, "I need shade cloth because the sun is just baking my plants." You know that the sun itself is scorching my plants. And I show with my par meter in
Mhm.
my last video, and I will this summer, how that's not entirely true. It's not the intensity of the sun itself; it's that baking hot root zone. And so the sun on that green stalk or the sun on the raised bed will raise that temperature dramatically,
Yeah.
more than more than anything else. And so we need to be very mindful of that when we're planting in the grow bags and stuff like that. You guys have to be real mindful of not just letting the bag sit out in the roasting hot sun. You know, we need to shade it, or we need to plant the thing at such a time where it will be able to grow and shade out itself.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
those are all things that I suggest to people. Jerry Bates says, "What is your opinion on food security and prices coming up this year?" Hot topic.
Yeah. So Uh, I think all of us are expecting it, and I think it's going to happen. Prices are going to come up this year. That is just, it's already happening, and you're going to see more of it. As to the food security, I'm not as worried about that. You know, I have more faith in our system, and I am not as worried about the food security. But I say that as a gardener who has a garden, who does food preservation, I still have winter squash that I harvested back in October on my table that I'll be using. And I've got my jars of fermented vegetables and my jars of pickled vegetables, and I've got frozen vegetables, and I have a freeze dryer. One of the best things ever was getting a freeze dryer. And so I've got a lot of fruits that were in season at the peak of the harvest that some of them were mine. My own peaches are incredible freeze dried snacks. But I also go to, farmers markets and the local fruit stand and preserve a lot of that. I don't think those kind of things are going away. Now, I think they're going to be maybe less of a supply because more people are going to discover that. But by doing it ourselves, we really help our own self worth as far as it comes to that food security issue. So I'm not worried about it. My opinion is if you act on it, you will be okay. If you just wait and expect that everything's going to be okay, it might not be. But then again, it might be. We've gone through these periods throughout our country's history where we have a dearth of those materials that we think we need, and then we have periods where we've got abundance of those materials. And so this is part of the normal cycle. It may be more pronounced right now, but one of the best ways to deal with it is to just make your own solutions. And I've been doing that for years.
Yeah, that it could not be more solid advice than that. And I'm in the same boat as far as not concerned about food security because I have the skills and I've practiced the skills over the years, growing, preservation, all of that. Now, a lot of people that we talk to and stuff is that they think that, well, if it gets too bad, I'll just start growing my own food. I'll just grow my own food. They're under a total misconception of what that actually takes. They think that they'll have their little plot and they'll just be growing all their own food. No, it doesn't necessarily work that way, and it's
Right.
you have to build these skills up. And so now, as the time, while food is still plentiful, and not saying that it won't be in the future, but learn the skills that are required, do the testing, learn where you're failing and stuff, because if your life depended on it, you don't want to have that be the time where you're testing anything.
Yep.
So can you speak a bit more about the freeze dryer? I'm really interested in that because I've always been on the fence about if
Yeah.
that's really a beneficial thing. I mean, in my mind, freeze dried foods is just like for if you want to reconstitute a meal and stuff. And I've not been that much into freeze dried foods, but so what is your opinion? What's the strength? What's the weakness? Would you recommend it for food security? What's the deal?
So, so the deal is, I love it. So I have a Harvest Right freeze dryer, and I have a partnership now with Harvest Right. So if you use the Gardner Scott code, I think it's $150 off. So because they're expensive, and that's the biggest disadvantage is they're expensive to buy. I had to wait about 20 years after I became a master food preserver before I actually got a freeze dryer, because it's one of those things that doesn't fit into your budget. You've got to plan for it over time if you want to buy it without a huge impact on your pocketbook. And so that being said, once I got it, I do all kinds of stuff with it. So I've got a few videos where I show some of the things that I've freeze dried. I love it for snacks. The difference is I've been doing dehydrating for decades now. And so dehydrating is a great preservation method, but it uses the heat to dry out the food. So essentially, you're baking at low temperature the foods that you're going to eat. And a lot of nutrients are lost in that process of dehydrating. They're not lost with the freeze drying, because the freeze drying actually takes the temperature down to minus 40 degrees, and from there creates a vacuum that draws out all of the moisture. And so that's one reason why it's so expensive, because it's a vacuum chamber that is also a freezer. And then it's also got the heat element to it, because it warms it back up so that super cooled air now the warm air actually holds more moisture than the cold air. So there's an interchange between the cold and the warmth, so that moisture is drawn away from the food. And what's left behind is what you see when you go camping. When you buy those freeze dried materials, a freeze dried peach looks like a peach. A freeze dried carrot looks like a carrot, and they're ultra lightweight. One of the first experiments I did was with zucchini, and the amount of water that a zucchini holds. We all know it holds a lot of water, but when you actually measure the weight of the zucchini beforehand and afterwards, you're talking, in a 1 pound zucchini, 12 ounces of that zucchini is water. And so you're left with nothing but the nutrients and the vitamins and a little bit of the cellular structure. And probably most importantly, if you seal it, and so when you get the harvest right, they use mylar bags in particular. You can preserve the freeze-dried materials for 20, 25 years with no degradation of the taste or the nutrients. And you can't do that with freezing or dehydrating or pickling. You might get 6 months or a year, maybe a few years. We all push the limits of what it, officially should be, and that's okay. But you're not going to get 20 years from a fermented pepper, or 25 years from your frozen tomato paste. And that's a key difference when we're talking about the food security aspect of it. Is you can package the things that you're growing and have them literally until you choose to use them, whenever that might be in the future. And it's also fun. I like to go to Costco and buy a bag of blueberries, frozen blueberries, and put them in the freeze dryer, and they come out as a healthy blueberry snack. And I do that with pineapples and mangoes and strawberries and anything that I'm not actively growing in my garden. During the growing season, of course, I'm going to harvest my own peaches, but I love it. Yeah, you should look into it more, Nate, because it you get hooked, and then you start. I've of course freeze dried candy, and because there's a lot of videos out there about like freeze drying Jolly Ranchers and stuff like that. So that's fun for the grandkids when I do that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah. So I hear you saying that things like fruits are really good for that. That you snack on the fruits. It's really good for food security, long-term food storage. How about like medium-term storage? Do you use it for things like that you regularly eat besides like little snacks and stuff?
Yeah,
Like I've seen whole meals freeze dried and stuff. Do you get into that kind of thing?
yeah, absolutely. So I've experimented a little bit with that. So zucchini bread is one of my favorite things of the whole world. And so one of the reasons I grow zucchini is to make zucchini bread, and then I'll freeze the zucchini bread. So I want to always have zucchini bread available when I want my zucchini bread, but that's kind of that medium term where if the zucchini bread's been in your freezer for a year, it just doesn't taste as good. But what I did as part of that initial exploration with zucchini is I measured how much water was being removed from the zucchini, and now I've got packets of freeze dried shredded zucchini. So I can make zucchini bread any time of the year I want by just opening up my pre measured shredded zucchini. And then my recipe, when I reconstitute it, it's 12 ounces of water. So I just use all the other ingredients. I take my zucchini, add 12 ounces of water until it reconstitutes, mix that into the flour and everything else, and then make my zucchini bread. And literally, because I did this test with some family, you cannot tell the difference between zucchini bread that's made with the fresh zucchini and the zucchini bread made with the reconstituted freeze dried zucchini. They are identical, they taste the same, the texture is the same. And that holds true with a lot of other things. Because I like the snacking aspect of it, I don't do a lot of reconstitution. I'll eat my tomatoes, my freeze-dried tomatoes as a snack, and I'll eat my cucumber slices that are freeze-dried as a snack. Because me personally, the texture when you reconstitute it is lacking. It's not quite the same. And so I like the crunch and I like the taste, and I don't feel like I need to put it into some of those dishes that I've added to the menu.
Okay, okay. So that makes more sense. So people shouldn't think that they're going to freeze dry it and then reconstitute it and they have the same tomato or that they
Right.
have the same kind of thing,
Right.
right?
Yeah. The mushy factor really becomes important. With time, you can figure out just exactly how much water to use and how long it needs to reconstitute. And that's what I did with my zucchini. tomatoes are hard because they are so watery, but yet they're fleshy. And so getting that consistency of I did cherry tomatoes. I did a video where I showed doing the freeze drying of cherry tomatoes, and I cut them in half. And when I tried to reconstitute it, it wasn't the same. The flavor was the same, but there was just a mushiness to it. And so when you add the freeze dried materials to a soup or to a stew, where you're not looking for that fresh texture, they're fine, and there's no issue with that whatsoever. It's really, if you like eating raw carrots or raw tomatoes or raw squash, freeze dry it and then reconstitute it, it's a different experience and not necessarily pleasurable.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, that's true with dehydrating as well. I mean, that's true, and that's even true with canning as well. I mean,
Yep.
that's true with freezing as well.
Yep.
So it really kind of it all just depends. There's no substitute for fresh eating, of course, but that makes a lot of sense. Okay, guys, so make sure you get the your burning question out. We got a few more moments with our guest here, and so tiptoe through the turnips says, "Oh man, my Greenstock was just delivered yesterday. What's the downside?" So I take it you got some experience with the Greenstock.
Yeah.
Can you let us know?
Yeah, I love my Greenstocks, and they also have a code. You could use the Gardner Scott code to get a discount on your Greenstocks as well. And the downside, it's all relative. I have four of the Greenstocks, and almost everybody I know that has a Greenstock buys another Greenstock and then buys another Greenstock. And so just expect that you're probably going to want more. And for many people, that's a downside because then you end up having all these Greenstocks all over the place. But like we were talking about with the containers earlier, Nate, with the temperature and the sun, that's a downside. You have to learn how to garden in a container. And if you haven't done pots and grow bags and 5-gallon buckets before, it's a learning curve, because that essentially is what a Greenstock is. It's just a series of containers that are stacked on top of each other, and you have to figure out how much to water it, what kind of sun it needs, what kind of plants it can sustain, and the first year that you have one, there you go. Bow tie life, same thing exactly. You end up getting more. The first year you're going to be doing a lot of learning, and then after that, that's when you start buying more, because what you've learned is, I have mine just outside my back door, and so I can grow fresh herbs and salad crops. And when it comes time to cook dinner, I just literally step out the door, harvest what I want, and then step right back in and use it in my cooking. And so those kind of advantages are amazing. But it takes, like regular gardening, it takes a while before you get to that point to figure out which plants do best, which ones you like growing, which ones grow well but you don't like growing. It's just regular gardening, but it's in a container.
Mm-hmm. And so two things. One, Serena says recommends turning it daily for equal light distribution. So do you recommend that? And then what plants would you recommend? What plants do well to try to shorten the learning curve for some people trying to grow zucchini out of one?
Yeah, so it depends on the time of year that you're growing. And so for many of us, the sun during the summer is as close to overhead as we're going to see. And so during the summer months, I don't rotate every single day, because for the most part, it's getting more even sun. So I'll tend to rotate about every 2 days, every 3 days during the summer. And I haven't noticed any problems, because even the backside is getting sun at different times of day. But during the spring and fall, yes, you do need to rotate it because the sun is lower in the sky and the backside is definitely being shaded. And a quarter turn per day is a great idea, and it works very well. The plants that do best for me are the plants that I grow in the Greenstock, and that's the lettuce. And so the way the Greenstock, for those of you that don't know it, it has tiers, and each tier has 6 pockets. And each of those pockets is the equivalent of like a 6-inch garden pot, and with a little bit extra soil thrown in the middle. And so on a level of 6 of those cells, I'll grow 6 lettuce or 6 pockets of lettuce, usually like 2 or 3 in each pocket. And then the next level down, I'll have a different type of lettuce. And then the next level down, I'll have a different type of lettuce. So I'll be growing 18 pockets of lettuce with like 2 plants in each. And I do succession planting. There you go. And so with the succession planting, while I harvest some, I'm sowing others, so that over the course of the season, I've got continual lettuce in the top 2 or 3 pockets. And then below that, or actually usually on top, I'll usually do basil. And so a couple years ago, I did an entire Greenstock, 36 of those cells with basil. And I think I had 8 different types of basil. Might have been 10. And so I was making pesto every single day, and I was using the basil in everything. And I froze the pesto, and I grew all of that. I actually grew more in my Greenstock than I had in the garden. It actually did better in the Greenstock. I've grown peppers. The peppers do well in the Greenstock. I think they do better in a raised bed. But you can grow peppers in a Greenstock. And the same with tomatoes and squash. You can grow them in a Greenstock. I find they do better in an in-ground bed or a raised bed. So for the most part, almost anything you're growing, you can grow in a Greenstock. I encourage growing those things that grow fast and that you can harvest easily, because you want to just keep doing it, and you want to have that succession of harvests over the course of the season that you're growing.
Very nice. Very nice. Okay, you've convinced me. I'm going to get one.
Good.
So
use the Gardner Scott code, or actually we'll talk about it afterwards. I have a suggestion for you.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, because I want to do that and then do some experimentations on it, growing some different plants for sure. I'll get a number of those because I get a lot of questions about those. And to me, they always looked a little gimmicky. And my experience with pots already is that they dry out fast. People grow the wrong things in them. You know, there's all kinds of things that happen. But I will give it a try, definitely. And I like the basil idea because I grow many different kinds of basil.
Yeah, it's fun. And, so, and, you know, and I think one of the big things, because I agree with you about the gimmickiness of it, and it wasn't until I got one, what makes the Greenstock different is it has internal reservoirs at each of those tiers. And so a lot of the other vertical systems are just pure gravity fed watering. So the top is always saturated and the bottom is always dry. And so the Greenstock has a central watering core that fills each of those reservoirs. So it's much more even watering from the top to the bottom, and really takes the thinking away from it. You just have to learn when to water and how often to water, and the Greenstock takes care of itself beyond that.
Nice. Very nice. Okay, well, Gardener Scott, I want to be respectful of your time, and we thank you so much for enlightening us with all kinds of good, solid advice. And this has been a real good chat. Do you have any parting words for the tribe?
No, I love the tribe. I love watching your videos. I love watching the comments. I like watching, you know, I tend to stay in the background with a lot of live streams and videos. You know, I've made the mistake before of making a comment and then suddenly everybody's focused on asking me questions. And I don't want to do that to you. So, but I still watch your live streams, and I love your interaction with the tribe and how they help each other out, how they help you out. And so I appreciate you letting me be part of the tribe today, where I can actually be in the forefront and not have to just sit in the background while everybody else is talking. And then we'll continue this on Monday, like you talked about. I got a lot of questions I want to ask you, and I think we'll have another wonderful hour and a half to talk about gardening.
Yes, absolutely. So guys, make sure that you bookmark that link that is in the description. That's to So I'll be on the other side. I'll be on his channel, and we'll be doing things a little bit differently there. It'll be question and answer. So if you didn't get your questions answered this time, or you want some specific ones, be sure to join us there. There is a link in the description for Scott's book that is not out yet. It's
Yeah,
coming
it
out.
comes out March 1st in the US and April 1st in the UK.
Okay, cool. Well, Scott, thank you so much. And I'm going to say some parting words to the tribe, and then I'll come back for a moment.
Okay. Thanks,
All right.
Nate.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Okay. I hope I'm not muted. Okay. Okay, guys. So what did you think about that? That was awesome, huh? That was just a lot of good information. And when he was given given his opinion on things and his experience, I saw so much in alignment with my own sort of philosophies. Definitely. So that's wonderful. Man, when we got that kind of thing, I like to just ask questions and just listen. It's so valuable. So guys, we've got a number of these coming up. Okay, so this is our first one of the season. We're going to have, let me, the next one I think is going to be, well, I have the schedule upstairs, but the next one's going to be Sean, I think, from Edible Acres Homestead. We got David the Good. We got Gary Pilichuk. I forget how you say his last name, from his channel. And so definitely stay tuned for all of those. Okay. So we have, and then we're going to have Nick from the Worm Farm Expert. So all your worm farming questions, Nick literally is doing it like on a scale. He's the worm farmer. So, and he knows a lot about soil. He's into the soil science kind of things. We haven't set a date yet, but probably shooting the soil is going to be on. And he's a soil scientist type microscope expert. So we can talk all kinds of stuff about the differences between compost teas and Miracle Grow and fertilizers and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of good stuff coming up. So the way that it's going to be is that we'll do one guest interview. So from now until like June, it's going to be one guest interview and then one solo. One guest interview and then one solo. So it's going to be like that every other time for the next, yes, Gary Pilarchik. Yeah, that's kind of difficult name for me to say. Yes, he will be on here as well. So if you guys have any other suggestions for people that could come on, then put the bug in their ear, because it's actually kind of difficult to get a hold of a lot of these guys because they get bombarded with emails. I mean, just like I do. And so you hit them up and you never get a response. But I don't take it personal. I totally understand how that goes. So put the bug in their ear, tell them, email me or whatever, and we'll make it happen. It'll just be this kind of thing. It's all good. It's all about sharing the knowledge. So yeah, be on the lookout for that. And guys, remember, we have a live stream tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern time on the Nate Muri channel, my personal channel, where we do things like meditation, and we talk more in depth about sort of spiritual matters, we could say. So that'll be tomorrow at 12 noon. That's not for everybody on here, but you can check it out. If that's for you, then stick around. And yeah, I really appreciate you guys' engagement. And when we have these guests on, make sure that you try to come up with a couple suggestions or a couple questions specifically for their area of expertise as it would relate to this tribe, so and our sort of philosophy of growing and things. Okay. So, all right, guys. Thank you very much. And remember, do all your shopping through Amazon through the Garden Like a Viking link. Okay. And it's just anything you open in that browser window, anything you put into your cart, we get the credit for. Okay. So that's the easiest way to help the channel. And the fertilizers will be for sale. It's still a few weeks away from getting the fertilizers settled, from getting them the certification. I had to send it off to a laboratory, get a guaranteed analysis. Then I had to contact the Purdue Extension office, and you got to make labels that give the Big 5 guaranteed analysis. There's a bunch of hoops you got to jump through. But you know what? I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it. So something just tells me to do it. So that's what we're doing. And we've got like 10,000 pounds of nutrients in the shop that are getting out of here one way or the other. So don't worry, we will have plenty for you guys. Okay. And let's see. Okay, guys. So we will see you next time. Thank you very much for everything.